Hi chess fans, welcome to this video on a game between Maxim Rodshtein with white, a strong Israeli grandmaster, and Vladimir Fedoseev with black. Vladimir Fedoseev has been going from nowhere to number 17 in the world. Well, nowhere. He was less than 2,700 and has played phenomenal chess in the last 12 months. And this game was played in the World Cup in Tbilisi 2017. After d4, knight f6, c4, e6, g3, d5, bishop g2, we have a Catalan. And as always, let's have a quick brush on some of the opening ideas. Here one main move is to play bishop b4 check. And what is the idea behind this move in the Catalan? Okay, the bishop checks the king, and the idea is that after bishop d2, black plays bishop e7. And what's the point behind this? The point behind this is that the bishop on g2 has been developed to this diagonal. As a consequence, this pawn on c4 here is not protected by the bishop anymore. In queen's pawn games, sometimes white plays e3, and then if black takes, white develops the bishop by taking on c4. Now, this is not possible because the bishop is on g2. That's the whole point in the Catalan. So as a consequence, if black takes, white has to retake in a different way. And usually what white loves to do is to play the knight to d2 so that he's ready to retake on c4. Another plan often is to play b3 and take with the b pawn, but that typically goes together with playing the bishop to g2 to b2. So all of these things together kind of make white look a little bit awkward and uncoordinated, because really this bishop would love to be rather on f4 or g5, or together with the idea on b2. And this bishop now also looks a bit funny because it's not coordinating with this pawn anymore. So the game could continue knight f3, castle, castle, c6, queen c2. So white has to play the queen to c2, b6, bishop f4. And here you can see that, the best move, the theory move in this position is actually to move the bishop again, because the bishop doesn't do much here and it's blocking the way for the knight, which after bishop to b7, eventually the knight, for example, in this position, loves to go to d2. Okay, and if white, for example, plays knight to c3 in this position, black can take this pawn here on c4, and it's not clear how white is actually going to retake this pawn. Okay, so in the game, Maxim Rodshtein played a very principled move, knight d2, saying, okay, I want my knight here on d2 anyway, so I'm not going to put my bishop in a worse position. But on the other hand, this move also blocks in this bishop, so the bishop is now on c1. Okay, the game continued. Castle, knight f3, b6, castle, bishop b7, a3, bishop e7, and b4. So white chooses to chase this bishop away, not as we have seen with bishop d2, but with this pawn push. And what do you think about this position? You could say, okay, what was the whole point in this Catalan with bishop b4 check? White seems to be all right, or is he not? Okay, actually, the engine and also the opening theory says black is absolutely fine in this position. And the reason is that black has no weakness in his camp and has solved all his main problems. Oftentimes this bishop is a problem. To develop this bishop, it's often caged in. And at the same time, black has plans with a number of breaks and easy play and well-coordinated play with his pieces, whereas white still has to find the ideal squares for some of these pieces here. So white normally has an advantage because he starts the game, But here, black has absolutely equalized in this position. And we will see a little bit more, why black is fine in this position. This game is actually a very good example of getting a feeling for this sort of position. But for now, we can remember, okay, black is absolutely fine in this position. Okay, black immediately plays c5, and we can see here now that all of black's pieces are very well coordinated. After b takes, rook b1, attacking the bishop, queen c8, protecting the bishop, bishop b2, white is trying to get some development, but black continues to have very harmonious development. And after d takes, knight to c5. In this position, black already seems to cash in positionally a little bit on his position, because look, these two pawns, especially the c4 pawn, look very weak now. And the point is that why would it be disadvantageous for white to take here on d5? What do you think about this position? This would indeed not be so good for black, because black can retake with the bishop, and in this position black has again very active pieces, and in addition to this he also now has weaknesses on the squares on b3 and e4. This rook is not in the game yet. The queen has to develop, but where does the queen go? These squares here are controlled. If the queen stays, there is a pin coming with the rook potentially. So this is a very, very comfortable position for black, because if you have active pieces and there are weaknesses on key squares, that's usually good for you. So for example, the game could continue knight e5, and when the knight moves, the bishop can exchange itself against the light square bishop, and black immediately gets good pressure. Now positionally this king is weak on the light squares, and this queen here is on a bad square, and the rook move highlights it. So moving the knight away already takes some defense away from the knight d2 and allows black to exchange white's strong bishop. So if the queen wants to get out, for example queen c2, black can activate the rook really quickly. White can also activate the rook now, but now black can take advantage of this weak square. And if black exchanges, there's already tactical threats and liabilities in the position because of the bad positioning of the queen. And let's have a look at another move, rook c1, attempting to pin the knight against the queen, but black simply plays queen b7 immediately with a threat on the bishop on b2. And after bishop d4, again, the rooks develop really quickly. And for example, if now knight e5, black can highlight the weakness of the a3 pawn, pin in the queen, and potentially also exchange this bishop. So you see all of these motives are in the position, and so it's really not in white's interest to take this pawn here, because positionally black gets a very strong position. And if white is not able to get rid of this pawn, well, then white is stuck with this weakness. And the game continued queen c2, and black played knight f to e4. So again, this square is a weak square in this position, and this is one motive. And now this knight here is very strong. It controls a lot of squares, and it's just a monster knight. Both of the knights are in the center now. And let's have a look again. Can white simply exchange this knight? What do you think about this position? Well, after d takes e, white has succeeded in exchanging the knight, but black has gained another resource, and this resource is this pawn. The pawn blocks the entire development of white. It's protected by the knight, which coordinates with the bishop, and it's also protected by this bishop, so this pawn is going nowhere. White has to move, and now black can develop a little bit. Both the rooks come into the play really quickly, and then play e3. So this is a very typical motive. So if you have this pawn here, one way to use it is to push it at some point, and then after this operation, all the white's pieces are on the left-hand side of the board, and the king is really weak, and the pawns are not protecting the king anymore. For example, after rook takes, queen a8 check, black immediately tries to take advantage of the weak queen, of the weak king. So if in this position it's not advantageous to exchange the knight because of this positional threat, again, then black is simply better because now this pawn is weak, this knight is super strong, cannot be exchanged. So this is where tactics and positional chess interact with each other. Okay, the game continued, rook fc1, f6, and now white plays exactly the two releasing moves that we have seen. First, c takes d, getting rid of this weakness, so white had to play this move at some point. And we see bishop takes, exactly as we have seen in the variations, with all the advantages of this move. And after knight d4, black played f5, and white exchanges this knight. So again, we see all of the moves that we've seen before. And now let's have a look at this position. White played queen c3. What should be black's plan? How can black take advantage of the central pieces, the squares that he controls, and also this pawn here in the center of the board? Okay, this is a very typical position where black's plan should be to attack the king. Let's have a look. All of these pieces can be brought in to the attack really quickly, and this line is open, so if the rook develops on this line, the other rook and the queen can come in really quickly on the attack of the king. On the other hand, all of white's pieces are currently on the other side of the board. There are not really so many pieces defending the king, and if they want to come to the defense of the king, they have very limited squares. So for example, this bishop is blocked by his own pieces. This knight doesn't have squares at the moment, so if the knight wanted to come and do anything useful, it would have to come in like this. But if the knight does this, it blocks the rook coming in. The rook can only come to the f4 square, where he has only the function of protecting this pawn. Black always has the resource of pushing this pawn and then activating this bishop. So it's very hard for white to bring in these pieces. Also the queen. This square is controlled. This square is controlled. On this square, the queen is prone to attacks by the dark square bishop. So black's plan should be to attack the king and take advantage of the positional resource that his pieces are very mobile against the king and white's pieces are very immobile against the white king. And let's have a look how Vladimir Fedoseev does that. It's very instructive on how he uses this positional resource. Rook f7, white tries to bring in the queen. Queen to d7, bringing the queen to a flexible square and out of this pin, and attempting and making room for the other rook. Bishop a1, trying to clear up the pieces so that the rook could come in via b2 to the defense, and doubling the rook, and immediately black has pressure on the f2 pawn. And if white was to defend with the rook, this is a very passive position for the rook. So black could now play on the dark squares, pushing this knight away and making space for the knight to go into the position via e6. And a lot of pieces are there to attack the light squares. Okay, so how does white deal with this pressure if not rook f1? White played f4. And the idea is that if black takes, white can stabilize the position and bring in the knight. And this bishop then suddenly gets some active counterplay, the rooks at the pawn structure, and all the pieces look much more harmonious. But Fedoseev plays e5 in this position. And let's analyze this move a little bit. What is the purpose of the move e5 and why is it an excellent attacking move? There are many motives and purposes. It's a multi-purpose move, and let's have a look at them. There are at least 5 purposes. Okay, one purpose is to immediately attack this knight. So there's a threat. This knight is under threat. And this knight doesn't have so many squares. Second motive is to put immediate pressure on f5. So black is also threatening to take on on f4. To take on f4, retakes and rook takes, wins a pawn. But this move also attempts to open the f5 for the rooks. So it's also a rook that increases the value of the rooks, this move. This move also opens the diagonal for the queen. And it allows the knight to get into the attack as well. It makes room for some pieces to be brought into the attack. So very, very multi-purpose move. And one move also is that it blocks in the bishop on a1. So this piece here, this pawn here, blocks the activity of the bishop once the knight moves. So many, many purposes for this move. Very, very strong move in this position, very instructive. I'm not sure why the engine is giving now a slight advantage to white. But let's have a look at how the game continues. F takes, and immediately queen g4. So we see now the rooks are open, and the queen comes into the attack. And we also see that this bishop is now blocked in by its own pawn. Rook f1, h5, attempting to lever open the position around the king. h3, pushing back the queen. The king tries to tuck himself away in a safe position. h4 again, putting pressure on the g3 pawn, and if white doesn't do anything, black is planning to open up the position around the king. g4 comes at the cost of these weaknesses on the dark squares. And this is going to be a very important motive in the attack. So white is now weak on the dark squares, and the defender of the dark squares, the bishop, is as far away as possible from the king as possible, and also blocked in by this pawn. And Fedoseev immediately attempts to take advantage of this, bringing the bishop to the attack on the dark squares. Queen moves away. And now in this position, have a look at this position. Fedoseev now decides to exchange both of his rooks. And why did black exchange rooks? What is the purpose behind this? Why does black judge that he's better in this position than in this position? Okay, this is a very, very important attacking motive. The motive is to exchange defenders. So if you imagined that the rooks are not on the board anymore, and maybe this bishop is also not on the board anymore, then white would only have these pieces to defend, and black still has these pieces to attack. And so black would be better off, even though black has fewer pieces for the attack, those pieces are stronger in the attack because there are no defenders anymore. So after these exchanges, black plays queen to f7, attempting to bring in the queen to the attack. And here black is already threatening queen to f2 with the penetration of the position that's very, very strong on the dark squares. Essentially, the rooks were also defending the dark squares, especially the f2 square. By exchanging them, black has weakened the f2 square, which he now attempts immediately to exploit. So white is trying to block this entry for the queen with knight f4 or knight f5. Black takes the time to bring in the knight, knight e6. Also, this knight can jump in on the dark squares. Again, those dark square weaknesses. King g1. Not quite sure why this is the strongest move. Probably it's all about the defense of the f2 square now. Okay, g6 opening up this line, and queen f4. The queen penetrates on the dark square. Bishop to g2. And now bishop to d8. And we can see that the queen is occupying the dark squares on this side, and now black attempts to bring in the bishop to cause damage on the dark squares via the a7 g1 diagonal. In this position, white played knight c4, trying to deny this square to black. But what is the problem with this move, and what is now the tactical blow and winning move for Vladimir Fedoseev in this position? Okay, black immediately played e3 and the position is lost. And the point is that suddenly this bishop gets activated. The bishop is threatening to take on g2, eliminating the last defender around the king. And at the same time it's also threatening queen f2. And as we will see in the game, even though this pawn blocks the a7 to g1 diagonal, it also establishes firm control of the dark squares, and this bishop can come in still in this way on the dark squares. So white takes the bishop, and after queen f2, king h1, queen f1, bishop to g5, and there's no way to prevent the mate here on the king. The pawns are doing an excellent job taking away these squares. The queen takes away the remaining squares around the king, and now there's the threat of mate. And the game continued bishop to e6, but the king just moves up, there's no more checks. And now queen e3, bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes, and the game was over. So let's have a look at a quick recap of what we can learn from this game. First, bishop b5, bishop b4, with the idea that bishop d2, bishop e7 is a good way to sow some discoordination in white's camp in the Catalan. And if white instead plays knight to d2 as in the position and then attempts to chase the bishop away, this position is actually a position where black has solved all his problems. So in this way we learn a lot about the Catalan, because the principled move knight d2 actually leads to a very comfortable position for black, and a position where white's pieces are a little bit caged in. Because black has a hard time getting rid of this pawn because of these weaknesses in this activity, and white also has a hard time exchanging this knight because of the diagonal and the pawn on e4. And in this position, black's best way, and very instructively as we have seen in the game, is to mobilize an attack on the king. And after e5, f takes, queen g4. The idea of playing on the dark squares, taking advantage of the fact that the a1 bishop is caged in, is a very important attacking idea. And then also exchanging the rooks here is a very interesting and instructive attacking resource. And then lastly, the blow in the attack of putting the bishop, moving the bishop to attack on the other open diagonal, and then exploiting the fact that this knight has moved away, to push the e3 pawn and open up the light squares as well, and then finishing the attack on the dark squares with two pawns, the queen and the bishop, which comes back to the other diagonal, coordinating against the king, while the main defender of the dark squares is all stuck here on a1. Okay, I hope you learned a lot from this game. Brilliant game by Vladimir Fedoseev. I think he's now number 17 in the world and still up to gain some rating points. And let's see how the remaining games in the World Cup will play out for him. He's surely playing some amazing chess. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.